This story isn't about the occult or the paranormal, but it's a real experience. I'm a female, and a few years after graduating from university, I got a job at a brokerage firm, and I had to move down south to Fukuoka. My company provided me with a place to live, right in the middle of the city. It was nice, rent was cheap, and I walked to work every day. I lived on the 10th floor of a 15-story building, which was almost new. Work was busy. I used to get home at around 9 p.m. every night. On each floor there was 8 apartments. I lived on the 10th floor in room 108. It was the last apartment as you got off the elevator. I would walk down the dimly lit corridor to my apartment each night. The people in Fukuoka have a strong sense of community and togetherness. In other words, if you come in as an outsider who isn't used to this kind of thing, then it can be difficult to adjust. It was tough making friends, but I had friends from Tokyo and other places, so I was alright. One day, I found out that someone from Tokyo was getting transferred. We will call A. I found out that she was a 32-year-old, and she was coming to set up a new branch of cosmetics store on a short-term basis as a supervisor. She was tall, had long hair, and beautiful. We got to know one another, and we went out for drinks. I liked her a lot. One night, all 3 of us were out drinking, and we headed home really late. We split up and went to our different apartments. It was past midnight when I got out of the elevator. I got ready to walk down that dark corridor, and I saw a guy outside of room 104. He was leaning with his back against the railing, and he was smoking a cigarette. I was pretty tipsy, so I said hi as I walked towards him. It wasn't uncommon to see people on the corridor. People hung laundry there and smoked there occasionally. After that night, I would see him regularly. A light exchange began. We started off with simple greetings. Then we would chat about other things. It was nice to have a neighbor to speak to now and then, since I was new in town. I was always busy and out late, so I never really had a chance to meet new people. One night, A came to my place on a Saturday, and we went out for some drinks. I remember she came back to my floor, and she said as she walked out of the elevator, "You live so close to me. I'll come over more, and we can drink." I saw that guy stood outside smoking again in the hallway. And I said, because I was drunk, "Hi. Too much smoking's bad for you." "Oh yeah? Well, too much drinking is bad for you," he replied. After this little interchange, we headed back to my room. All the while, A kept silent. As soon as we got into the room, A said, "Hey, pack some things. You're moving in with me for about a week, okay?" I asked her outright, "Why are you asking me to do this so suddenly?" No matter how many times I asked, she wouldn't explain. It was totally unreasonable. She kept on insisting that I did it. After a while, she wore me down. I just went with it. I threw together all the things I would need for a week. Laptop, cosmetics, work clothes, underwear, all that stuff. By the look on A's face, I knew she wasn't kidding. This was serious. She called a taxi. We grabbed all my stuff and we left together. It was when I went back to the office on Monday, things became a little clearer. My boss ran over to me as soon as I walked in and called out my name. He looked as white as a sheet. "Oh, thank God you're okay. The real estate just called." He was grabbing a newspaper so tightly, and he was holding it up to show it to me. There on the front page was a story about a stalker murder, alongside a big photo of my apartment block. I found out that the suspect was a recently divorced man who had been stalking his ex-wife. She had instigated their separation, and it seemed as if he just couldn't handle that. He would wait for her every night in front of her apartment. She was working late, just like I was. After many nights of waiting for her to return, and her not coming home, one night she finally did. And that was when her ex-husband took her life. He attacked her with a kitchen knife. The number of stab wounds was said to be in the dozens. I shuddered when I saw the photo of the man charged with her murder. It was the face of the man I had seen many nights coming home drunk, stood on the balcony smoking. I was really frightened, and I called A later that day. She just said, "It's okay, it's okay." After he attacked his ex-wife, surveillance camera footage caught him walking slowly to my door and standing in front of it for a long time, then violently trying to get into my apartment. I immediately asked to be transferred to another branch, and A and I had to be questioned by the police. I needed some beer that night, so at A's while drinking, we spoke about what had happened. One thing didn't make sense to me though. How did A know that I had to leave? A said that she had some insane intuition that something was about to happen with that man, and just every sign in her mind was saying, "Get out of that building." She went to kiss me, but I'm straight and I had no idea she was a lesbian. I said that we should just keep things platonic and that I would never forget her. A went back to live in Tokyo, and we lost touch. Sometimes I wonder if I was persuaded to live with her for that week because it was what she wanted, or if it was genuinely her red flag sixth sense that saved me. Either way, I'm still here, and I'm very grateful for that. This is hard for me. It's the story about my niece's kidnap. She was only in kindergarten. Due to a number of reasons, my family has moved houses a lot. We had moved to a new place, and I had no ties or affinity with our new home and town. I was living with my parents, sister-in-law, and my niece. My sister-in-law's husband was my brother, but sadly, he passed away. I was there to help with the funeral and other legal arrangements. I was supposed to pick my niece up from kindergarten. I went to collect her, but I couldn't see her anywhere. I went to speak with the staff, and when I told an employee that I was here to collect her, the employee's face went white. They had told me that someone had already came and collected her. The person who collected her said that my sister-in-law and I had agreed to allow my niece to be collected. I immediately called the police. I then called home to explain the situation, and that I had already called the cops. I went to the local police station, and an officer asked me if I knew of anyone who might have done this, to which I replied, yes. I showed the officer a photo of my ex-fiancé. I told him that this man had been stalking my sister-in-law for years. Back then, the word stalker wasn't commonly used in Japan. Before I met my ex-fiancé, he was stalking my sister-in-law. He decided to date me so he could get closer to her. I had no idea that this was going on until I discovered some disturbing photos and videos he had taken of her. I felt like such a fool when I found out. I don't think he had any intentions of marrying me. Anyway, back to the main story. We went back to the kindergarten, and the employee there looked at the photo of my sister-in-law's stalker and said that he was the man who had came to collect my niece. The police then contacted his family home to get his current address. Some other police officers headed to my parents' home to wait and see if anything would happen there and to keep my family at ease. After I had explained everything as best I could, I was asked to go home and wait with my family. The police raced to my ex-fiancé / my sister-in-law's stalker's home. There was no one home, but the police said that they would stake the place out just in case he came back. We had to stay home in case he made contact too. I cannot express the level of sheer panic which gripped my family that day. Seconds crawled by like hours. My sister-in-law's face had turned almost blue. She was muttering to the police officer gripping her hand. "Protect her. You have to protect her." She was praying to her late husband, my brother. My mum began praying with her. I think that they just couldn't stand not doing anything. They had to try something. Then, after a while, all our despair and fear was erased when an officer exclaimed, "We found him!" They had a call from a hotel on the outskirts of town that a man had checked in with a girl matching my niece's description. The employee manning the front desk said that a man had called downstairs and said, "She's in danger. Help. Call an ambulance and the police." a man said to another member of staff in the hotel as he ran out of the lobby. A man ran into a policeman at the train station and told him that the kidnapped girl and the man that they were searching for were in a nearby hotel. He even gave the policeman the room number. He apparently pleaded with the officers to save her, which is when we found out that the police had found him and our niece. Thanks to these tip-offs, my niece was saved and my stalker ex was brought to justice. One thing that has never been explained is, who tipped the police off and the hotel staff? I asked the hotel staff if they could remember what the man looked like who told them where my niece was, and they said that they couldn't. Neither could the officer near the train station, which I found very odd. It is for this reason that my family are convinced that it was my late brother protecting his daughter from beyond the grave. My niece said when she came back home that, "There's someone who I wanted to introduce you to. Go and come as you please, but please stay in contact," my sister-in-law said aloud. I hope that it was my brother, and I hope that he's still here, in some way or another. This is the weirdest and creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. I'm not too articulate with the words, so, bear with me. It happened when I bumped into an old friend. He had a friend with him, some guy he worked with. We were drinking and having a great night, so much so that I ended up missing my last train home. My friend told me that I couldn't stay over at his place. He had recently got married, and he was going to be in enough trouble for staying out so late. His friend offered me a place to crash for the night. It was a bit weird since it was the first time that I had met him. He seemed to come from money, so I guessed I might get a decent place to crash. I thought, why not? My assumption was correct. Even though he had only recently graduated, he lived alone in a huge apartment. I lucked out. He set me up a bed in a room closest to the door. His apartment, big though it was literally bare. There was no furniture in the rooms. No sense that it had been lived in. No personal touches. It reeked. It smelled like a garbage dump, even though it looked clean. I didn't know what to say. Thankfully, I was still pretty buzzed. "I'm heading to bed. My room's pretty dirty, so if you need anything, just knock, but don't come in, okay? It's late and I want to get some sleep. You should too." We chatted a little bit longer, but I can't remember what was said. I went back to the room he had prepared for me. When I was alone in there, and the buzz was slightly wearing off, I began to notice the smell. The bedding he had provided stank so bad. It was like it had been sprayed with either insect repellent or air freshener. Something stank like garbage as well. It seemed to be coming from a corner of the room, the corner where the closet was. I was drunk enough to be curious. I stumbled over to the closet with my smartphone's flashlight enabled, and I opened it. I wasn't ready for what I saw. Inside, there was a pile of mannequins' limbs wrapped up in a blue tarp sheet. They were painted gold in places. There was some filthy-looking stuffed animal, covered in some sort of food waste. There were rotten flowers. This seemed to be the source of the odor. In a corner of the back of the closet, there was a bag of moldy food, plates of uneaten stale food, all left out as if they were some sort of crude offerings. There were empty cans of bug spray and air fresheners in there too. A picture of a guy dressed up as the Dalai Lama was in there. He was kneeling before a huge roaring fire. He looked like he was praying to it. This photo was stuck on the back wall of the closet. This gave me the chills. I wanted normality again. I silently closed the closet and returned to the bedding he provided. I'm so glad I did, because the second I got near the bed, I heard a door open. I lay down on the filthy bedding and stayed as still as possible. I heard the door to my room open. I tried my best to pretend to be asleep. I buried my face in the disgusting bedding and tried not to gag. I heard the door to the room shut, and I sat up slowly, contemplating my next move. After about 10 minutes, I opened the door and slunk out. I silently grabbed a knife from the knife block in the kitchen. This may sound drastic, but I wanted safety. This guy was unpredictable. I knew nothing about him, and who knows where else he was hiding in his apartment. I then went back to my room to grab my things. I opened the door and just bolted. I felt as if he was right behind me, but I knew he wasn't. I managed to catch a taxi. I called my friend the next day and I really let him have it. He said that he didn't know the guy that well. My friend said that the guy was just a temp at his work. My friend said that he never went back to work again with him. One thing I was worried about, though, was my business card holder. I wondered, well, hoped, that I had lost it outside that weirdo's house, but I couldn't be sure. Anyway, this happened about 3 years ago, and I didn't pay it much mind until what happened next. Recently, I found that business card holder, after I came back from lunch, sat in my desk drawer. I don't even want to touch it. To be honest, I'm pretty scared. This weird guy knows who I am and where to find me. I don't know if anything will come from this, but it has freaked me out. Is he stalking me? I'm sorry if this story's a bit long, but it's true. I live in a small town which was partially destroyed in the Miyagi earthquake. Many homes were lost. Our house wasn't affected too badly. One of the outer walls were damaged and a huge chest of drawers fell down. Since we work from home, it was a bit disruptive and difficult to find the time to clean up. I was taking calls from customers every day. My dad was busy working and visiting customers. Since the damage was so great, we had nothing but sympathy for them, and we wanted to do everything we could for them. A week passed in the blink of an eye. One weekend, I knew I had to clean the house up, but I was just so tired. I couldn't find the energy. So I decided to go on a solo trip to the hot springs to rejuvenate myself. There was one about 40 minutes away by car. I got back later, and from the car I could see that a light was on the second floor. My parents and my grandparents are usually out at around this time I got back. Furthermore, the light that was on was the light in my bedroom. I left for the hot springs at around midday, so I would have no reason to turn that light on. I wondered if it was my little brother. He lives in Tokyo, but he might have come back to visit us. Maybe he was in my room playing on my console or something. It was a bit of a stretch, but it did seem feasible at the time. I parked up and walked into our family home, not noticing that the door was unlocked and my brother's shoes weren't by the entrance. I called out that I was home. I ran upstairs and down the hall to my bedroom. The door was shut. I opened it and saw that my room was empty. Yet the light was still on. My bed looked different, especially the covers. Some of my drawers were open too. It dawned on me now that the door shouldn't have been unlocked if everyone was out. Why was my bedroom light on? Where was my brother? So many different thoughts swirled around my head. I froze in place. Suddenly, I couldn't move. I remembered that there had been burglaries in the area, and I stood there, shocked. I looked around my room and noticed that my PC and monitor were turned on. Now I knew that a person had been in here recently. If you leave your computer on, the monitor goes to sleep after a while, right? They could still be in the house, I grimly thought. I tried to regain my composure and think about what to do next. I then heard a noise from my closet. The intruder was in my closet. I looked over and saw an eye peering at me from the crack between the doors. I ran for it as fast as I could downstairs and out the door. I got into my car and drove to a friend's house. I called my parents when I got there. I didn't call the police. I should have, but I was in such a panic. I guess I just wanted to know if my parents were okay too. That was pretty dumb of me, I know. Luckily my dad was close by, and he raced home, and he checked the house over, but he couldn't find the intruder anywhere. There was no sign of anything in any other rooms being disrupted either. It seemed as if My room was the only room which had been targeted. The strangest thing was that nothing had been stolen. I told the police at this point, but they told me that what had happened was probably just a misunderstanding, and I had forgotten to turn the computer off and the light off and lock the door. They therefore wouldn't investigate. This really pissed me off. The whole incident freaked me out. I wondered if my family had a stalker. I thought about that for a while and spoke with my family, and then I remembered. A guy. From the year before last to last year, even though I would do nothing other than stay at home or hang out with my friends, a guy was harassing me. We only went out on a couple of dates, and I quit seeing him after he started to become possessive. He would hide outside my house and jump out at me, call me constantly, drop off gifts, and just genuinely terrify me. It stopped at around October time last year. I thought that was all behind me. He lived miles away in the next city, but he was super persistent. He was crazy. This really scared me, so my dad decided to take things into his own hands. He went to this guy's house to confront him. There was no evidence that this was the guy who had been in our home. There was no evidence that anyone had been in our home, but I had a gut feeling he was something to do with it. I wanted him to admit it, so the police could get involved and I could get a restraining order. We arrived at his house, and as we did, his mother ran out to greet our car. She didn't look well. You're the one who did this to my son, she called. She looked so angry. He died yesterday, she stated in a low voice. We didn't know what to say. My dad began to stutter an apology and began to explain the purpose of our visit, but she cut him off. What did you do to my son? I did my best to explain the chain of events which led us to her house. Last year, and the one before, the break-in, etc. Then she looked at me and said, "You killed him." Then she just started screaming it. We argued, but there was nothing we could say to her. Obviously, she must have known something about what had happened, otherwise she wouldn't have reacted like that. We gave up and went back to the car. We didn't want to worsen her pain if her son was really dead. She didn't seem herself. She was always nice when I met her. My dad really wanted to get to the bottom of this. He was so angry that someone had been in our family home. We drove to a convenience store and waited there for about an hour, and then went back to his family home. My dad tried one of the neighbors. I think it was the second house down from his. He asked if they knew anything about what had happened. And it seems as if he did take his own life, but they could not be certain. They said that he had demons for sure, and that they would hear him screaming late into the night. This was disturbing and sad, to be honest. When we got home, we talked about other things to stop thinking about it. I was winding down to get ready for bed. I was checking my emails and listening to some music. I always saved my MP3s in my documents for some reason. I opened the folder and noticed a text document that hadn't been there before. It was addressed to me. I was worried about opening it. I didn't like it. After a few agonizing moments, my curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, and it horrified me. Of course, it was from that man. All my suspicions were now justified in this document. I read it all, and it made me feel sick to my stomach. He was writing it as if it was the last words anyone would read by him. It was like a suicide note. He had detailed all the dates we had been on, as well as writing about made-up dates that we had never been on. He sounded completely deluded. He was so normal when I met him. He went to a good university, and he was a perfectly fine person. Why did he do this? It was so sad. But I had no proof that he was dead. I found no obituary, and believe me, I looked for one. I started to get really creeped out again, and before long, I felt eyes on me wherever I went. I decided to park further away from our house, and I changed rooms. I noticed that from close by, on a hill, if you had binoculars, you could see right into my second floor bedroom. I now live on the ground floor in my brother's old room. I still feel as if he's out there somewhere, but I doubt it from time to time. This is just a reminder that if stalking stops after a while, it doesn't mean that it stopped for good. I mean, he got into our house, and he knew the password to unlock my computer.